Hi, I'm Scott Graffius, and this is Are You Realizing All the Benefits from Agile? I want to mention up front that for content accessibility purposes, this presentation uses relatively large size fonts in most cases and high contrast elements, including some custom vibrant visuals. I'll be also describing the on-screen content, in some cases word for word, in most cases not. And we're off. There are a variety of approaches supporting the development and delivery of products and services, and most fall into one of two broad major categories, that being traditional and agile. As a 30-second overview, traditional being an example for software, for example, being requirements followed by technical design, followed by coding, followed by testing, and so on. Whereas agile is more iterative and incremental in nature. For example, the most common duration of a Scrum project or a sprint is 2 weeks. Organizations are increasingly embracing agile to best meet their business needs of faster response to change, faster time to market and ROI realization, and continuous improvement. And all of that really supports innovation and helps drive competitive advantage as well for the organization. So are you realizing all the benefits from Agile? This session gives a quick overview of Scrum, which is the most popular Agile framework, but it's unique in that it's based on and highlights top factors from successful implementations. So rather than expressing the viewpoint of one organization or one resource or one document, it is by design quite the opposite. I have gathered up information from hundreds of successful implementations, and in presenting highlights, albeit at a fast pace because of our time constraint, and that's what this presentation is all about. And the goal is to give you practical information you can use. Some resources do take direction from the Scrum Guide, and that document was updated in November of 2020. So I want to speak to it. The Scrum Guide updates have no impact on this talk. And that's because the Scrum Guide had changes which were integrating information which was already in this presentation because it was already in my source material. This talk is about highlights of factors from successful implementations. It's not based on any one resource, so no impact. And there were a few small edits. For example, the Scrum Guide changed the term development team to developers. And so I went ahead and I implemented that. So in case you were wondering, I wanted to cover that. And this is going to go at a very fast pace. The end-to-end time is 45 minutes. This is accordingly not a full training on Agile or Scrum, but rather presenting an overview for if you're not familiar with it and highlights of successful factors. So do you need to do all these steps? No. But these are things you might want to consider doing because of they're being done by people who are successful with their implementations. So here are the objectives: to understand a high-level view of the framework, to also understand the related roles, responsibility, tools, and techniques, and all of which is inclusive of top success factors. The agenda, this is how this talk is structured. There is the introduction, objectives, and agenda. So we're almost done with that one. Some about information, the Scrum framework, which is the main portion of this talk, a quick wrap up, followed by digital download takeaway, and Q&A and thank you. And speaking of Q&A, I look forward to your feedback and answering any questions you have. At the end of this talk and any time remaining, I'll be addressing them via chat functionality. So should we run out of time, or if you have a question after the conference, you can also reach out to me. There's information on the conference website and in the digital download, which I'll cover at the end, and in this presentation on how you can connect with me through social accounts and otherwise. So wanted to cover that. So here's some information about me and my organization. I'm a Agile project management practitioner, consultant, author, and speaker. And I'm the founder and CEO of Exceptional PPM and PMO Solutions. And those acronyms really, well, they stand for Project Portfolio Management and Project Management Office, but it's all inclusive in that we're talking about project, program, portfolio, PMO, Agile, and otherwise. So what we do is we help clients strengthen their capabilities so that they can best realize their strategic objectives and business initiatives. So confident are we have a delighted client guarantee trademark. And in terms of my credentials, I have 7, and the first 4 are Agile and Scrum, more specifically related. I also have the Project Management Professional, ITIL, and Lean Six Sigma credential. And my background spans diverse businesses or industries, everything from entertainment and government to consumer products, R&D, media, and more. And I'm honored to have been a contributor and reviewer of content for the Project Management Institute. Some recent examples include the current version of the Project Management Body of Knowledge, the Standard for Program Management, and their Global Congress. I was a reviewer of content for their Global Congress. I'm also a member of the review team for Scrum Alliance as well. So I wanted to mention that, both the PMI and the Scrum Alliance. And I'm also highly honored that content for my books, which are 2, as well as my workshops, speaking engagements, and more, have been featured and used by a variety of different sources, media outlets, publications, businesses, governments, universities. And these are some examples. I will not list them all, but I will mention just a few. The United States Department of Energy, Cisco, Gartner, Microsoft, Oracle, Ford, Sweden's Innovation Management, Yahoo Finance, Tufts University, the New Zealand government, and many more. Here we are moving on to, at a fast pace, onto the Scrum framework, which is the main portion for this talk. If you're curious, I have about the definition of Scrum. If you're not familiar with it or otherwise curious, here's what I have, and I will read it out to you. Scrum is the leading Agile project development and delivery framework. It encompasses principles and practices that helps teams deliver the highest business value work in short cycles. The business sets the priorities, and self-managing Scrum teams determine the best way to deliver the features. Working product or service is demonstrated frequently, which enables speedy feedback, rapid adaptation to change, and continuous improvement. And for anyone who likes to keep track of the word count, there's the 62 words. As mentioned earlier, this presentation is really all about the successful Scrum implementations. And I did want to comment that it's also based on values and principles of Agile. So it's got it all in there, built in. In terms of, well, where does this information come from? Well, over 100 publications in terms of successful implementations. Here is just a handful of some diverse examples, all of which are detailed here and more in the bibliography, which is available in a digital download along with more information, which I'll cover at the end. But here we're talking about the Project Management Institute, Scrum Alliance, Agile Alliance, MIT, IEEE, Harvard Business Review, and others. I just wanted to give you just a few examples of the organizations with whom I have referenced their materials to assemble this presentation. Velocity is an example of something that, without naming names, a popular guide is silent on. And by silent, I mean that they don't say you should or shouldn't use velocity. But velocity is by far the most frequent metric in Scrum and successful implementations inclusive. So of course it's in this presentation. So I just wanted to give you an example of something that may not be covered by others, but is quite popular and common and used by successful implementations, and therefore it is in this presentation. There are other examples, I just wanted to give you one. When I look at Scrum, and I look at the different roles, and I look at the events or the meetings formerly known as ceremonies and other aspects, there's a lot to take in, and some of the terms might be self-explanatory and some may not be. But what I decided to do was to take all of the different aspects that are unique to Scrum and to order them into logical sequential chunks of work, or steps, if you will. So I sliced it into 10 sections. And what we'll do is, and then I map those to this illustration here. And then what we'll do is we will zoom in on each of these 10, albeit at a fast pace, and highlight the successful practices. The first is the product or service vision, also known as the product or service statement. And here is a template that is credited to Jeffrey Moore, a quite popular template. For, and then you name the customer or the user. Who, and then you name the needs. The, and you name the product or service name. Is a, you name the product or service category. That, and you specify the benefit or why you want to buy or use it. Unlike, and then you name the competitors or alternatives. Our product, and then you list how it's different or the value proposition. So this is the template. The red is the constant, and the black text is what gets filled in with something that's unique to your product or service. So here's what it might look like. I'm going to read it. It's a little wordy, but I'm going to read it. It's one of the few slides I'll be reading verbatim. For small-sized companies who need a simple business intelligence tool, the widgets is a cloud-based offering that provides a process for analyzing data and presenting actionable information to help executives make well-informed business decisions. Unlike similar services, our product works both online and offline. Again, it's a little wordy, but just to give you the idea of how that template could work. So do you need to do this? Well, the short answer is no, but really the answer is, well, why wouldn't you want to do it? Picture two teams. One team, by the way, the product owner collaborates with the business stakeholders on this statement and iterates until it's been nailed. So picture two teams. One team has this, one team doesn't. One team has this, and then they move on to subsequent steps. One team doesn't have this, and they move on. Which one do you think has a competitive advantage in terms of things going smoothly and ending well? So anyways, this is the product service vision statement. And up next is the roadmap. And the suggestion is to keep this as simple as possible. The columns represent the interval or frequency or duration, and quarter is quite popular, so that's what's shown here. The first three rows are quite generic and could be applicable to any kind of a project, including something that's not Agile or Scrum. But I'll mention them here. We have a name. It could be a name, a code name, a version name. And then you have a goal, why we're doing this. You know, what's the benefit for doing this to the company or others? Customer acquisition, retention, increased revenue, decreased costs, whatever the goal or goals are. The features, high level, not a requirements document. So single multiplier game, 21 songs, dance routines, and workout modes. Even that's a bit wordy. But so you get the idea. And then this is the most important one that's unique to Scrum. And that is, well, what's the forecast? How long will this take for us to do this work? Forecast of the number of sprints. Well, we haven't talked about sprints and story points and velocity yet. So rather than talking about them sort of out of context, we will talk about them in context and then come back to this particular step and revisit it and answer that question. So that was the roadmap. And again, we'll revisit the forecast in a few minutes. Up next is team formation. And the Scrum team is comprised of developers, product owner, Scrum Master. So the guidelines are between 3 and 9 people to do the work. despite the term developer, it could be a tech or a non-tech project. In a tech project, it could be an actual developer, a tester, and so on, but it's the people doing the work. Older guidance used to be 5 to 9 people. Now it's 3 to 9. So that's why the 5 to 9 is in the sort of a gray, lighter font there, just for reference. So if you come across a article or a book and it mentions 5 to 9, that was the guidance a few years ago. It's been updated to 3 to 9 and now called developers. It used to be called development team. Next is one product owner and one Scrum Master. And the reason I put a number 1 there is just to really emphasize we're talking about one person, meaning they're dedicated. So when the team is new, or if things aren't going fantastically, the answer is one product owner, one Scrum Master. So once everything's great, the satisfaction of the team is high, the satisfaction of the stakeholders is high, there's a regular, predictable cadence on delivery, and everything's just fantastic otherwise. Sure, if you want to experiment and do something like, well, this Scrum Master will spend 1/3 of her time on this team, 2/3 on that team. The product owner will be split between 5 teams or what, something like that. You can do that experiment. It's not recommended when starting out, and when you do the experiment, it's recommended to do it only when after everything is tackled and everything is running very, very well. So you have something to compare it against in case it doesn't go well with splitting up somebody's time that way. So anyways, so when you have 3 to 9 developers or people doing the work, one product owner, one Scrum Master, the total is 5 to 11 people. So that's the size of the Scrum team. Next is the backlog, the product service backlog. And the backlog is simply a list of work to be done. And the most common way to articulate the work to be done or to capture the work to be done is through user stories. So if you're not familiar with a user story, it's a short description of a feature told from the point of view of the person who wants the feature or function. And there are many templates. Here's a quite popular one. And I'll fill it in here. I'll say, as a customer, I want shopping cart functionality so that I can buy products online, right? So there are other templates. This is quite a popular one. And this is the user story is in this presentation for that reason. But a description of work can take any form you like. It's very common to have some delineation of category, feature, bug, what have you. The next column here should be thought of as, what is the preliminary assessment of complexity? Not hours. Hours come in a little later in this presentation in a few minutes. But what is the high-level preliminary assessment of complexity for this user story or this description of work? And there's a variety of ways to get at that. The most common is story points. I mean, you can do like small, medium, large, that kind of thing. T-shirt sizing, as it's called, but story points is by far the most popular, and so that's why it's here. There are software tools or apps that the teams can use that facilitate the exercise to ascertain story points for work. And I've also seen in highly technical teams who favor physical cards. So here's an example of complexity estimation via story points with physical cards. And the time that we have doesn't permit further explanation of the exercise because it certainly can easily be its own 45-minute talk. But I did want to mention that story points are the most popular, and there's a variety of ways to facilitate getting the story points for work. Priority is the most important thing in that the work needs to be sorted and ordered continuously. It's a live document, this product service backlog. So that the number 1 priority is first on the list. The second is number 2, and so on. And we're still in the pre-execution phase. Nothing's happened yet in terms of the sprint. So that's why it says not yet in the sprint. So product service backlog. Next is the sprint planning part 1. And this is where the team is going to identify what they're going to commit to completing in the upcoming sprint. So they're still in planning, and that's step 5 out of 10. Here you have the product release backlog, and the team's going to simply identify the work that they're going to do. They're going to review the work. They're going to discuss it with the product owner. The Scrum Master is also present, but the development team is going to make a commitment to what they're going to be doing in the upcoming sprint. If there's absolutely no history, there's no data on the team, they're going to just take their very best guess. And they still have an opportunity shortly, and in this presentation in a couple minutes, to do some fine tuning and make some changes, but they're going to take their very best guess for the work that can be done. If there is history for the team, they will know their average velocity, which we'll talk about velocity in a few minutes. And let's just say that the team's average velocity is 25, right? Well, the first 5 items in the product backlog total 25. So the team has said, yes, we will do the first 5 items. We don't think we can do item 6 because, you know, that's an additional 5 story points, but we can do the first 5. So that's their commitment. If I had to sum it up very, very quickly, very briefly. So the next step, though, is how are they going to accomplish the work? That was what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, and also some fine tuning of the list, potentially. So step 6 is the product backlog. So they're taking it's a sprint backlog. They're taking the product backlog and they're taking chunks of work from it and moving it into the sprint backlog. So it's their to-do list for the sprint. So it looks very similar to some of what we've already seen. We have a description or a user story. We have complexity, in this case, story points. And then here you have a list of the tasks. Again, it could be a tech or a non-tech project. For a tech project, maybe there's research, design, development, testing. You list all the tasks that need to be done for that user story, and also identify the estimated hours. So what you can do now is you can total up those hours and say, how do those hours compare with the team's availability in upcoming sprint cycle? Maybe if they can take on more work, so they collaborate with the product owner and move something from the product backlog into the sprint backlog, right? Or maybe this is too much work. Maybe they thought it was, maybe it's more complicated than they thought, from an effort standpoint at least. So maybe something needs to move from the sprint backlog back into the product backlog. And in that case, likewise, the developers, formerly known as development team, will collaborate with the product owner and will make that happen. And then the remainder here is the execution phase, which is covered next. So I'm going to fast forward through that and move into execution. So this is where the work is occurring. A sprint can run up to a month. 2 weeks is the most common duration. So that's what's shown here. And while the work is being done, there's some aspects that you may or may not be familiar with, which I like to highlight. And that is the task board, the burndown chart, the impediment backlog, the daily Scrum, and the potentially shippable increment. The task board can be a whiteboard, post-it notes, flip chart paper, software tool, whatever you'd like. But the recommendation and supported by the successful implementations is keep it as simple as possible. You might want to change maybe some of the labels, like doing, you might want to call it in progress and things like that, but to keep it as simple as possible. The way it's organized is that the first item, the first row, is the #1 priority from the sprint backlog, which was the #1 priority from the product backlog. So, and then for that, you have all the work that needs to be done, the tasks. And as the work is progressing, it moves from left to right. The to-do moves to doing, maybe you call it in progress, and then doing moves to done. And keep the columns, the recommendation is keep them to as few as possible. Maybe you want to have some additional columns, but keep it as simple as possible is the best advice I can give you based on my own experience as well as the research. Next up is the sprint burndown chart. But in order to talk about that, we have to talk about velocity. And in order to talk about that, we have to talk about user stories again. So here, let's just pretend to keep it simple. And in the interest of time, let's say that a sprint has 3 user stories. And at the end of the sprint, user story A, which is 13 story points, is done. User story B, 5 story points, is done. User story C, 3 story points, not done. What's the velocity? It's only the story points for done user stories. In this case, the answer is 18. 13 from user story A, 5 from user story B equals 18. Well, what if user story C is 99.99999% done? Doesn't matter. If it's not done, it doesn't count. And there's a variety of reasons for that. One of which is only done functionality is shown in the review or the demo in the shippable, to give you the short answer. And here we have the sprint burndown chart. At the bottom, using the most common duration of 2 weeks, we have 10 working days. So you see the 10 days at the bottom. And on the side, on the y-axis, you have the remaining work. So let's just say that a sprint involves 22 story points. Well, the idea here is, in this burndown chart, is you're starting with 22, and as work is completed, you're subtracting it so that by the end, you have 0. That's the goal, right? The goal is to get through all the work. So that's what a burn down chart is. And then you track your progress against it. So a burn up chart would be you start with 0, you end with 22, you map your progress in that direction. It's just sort of a flip version of a burn down chart. Anyways, burn down chart's the most popular, so that's why I showed that there. Now that we talked a little bit about burn down chart, velocity, and story points, we can go back and revisit how long will it take? What's the forecast of the number of sprints? Well, it's quite simple once you have history. All you do is you add up the story points and divide by the average velocity for the team. So to keep it simple, 100 story points, the average velocity is 20. Well, it's 5 sprints. If a sprint is 2 weeks, well, that's 10 weeks. Now, this is a very short answer, and it might be perfect for some organizations. Other organizations might want to have standard deviations and ranges and such, and that's fine. But this is what's common to most organizations, so I showed this here for you. And up next, we're going to go back to where we had left off. We have the impediment backlog. Looks very similar to an issue backlog on a non-agile project, perhaps. But the one thing that is unique is the definition. Anything preventing the team from progressing or improving is an impediment. And keep in mind, because agile projects, Scrum in this presentation, are relatively short, things need to be addressed in a very fast, timely manner, because before you know it, you're on to your next sprint. There's a daily Scrum meeting, also known as a daily stand-up meeting. There's a term time box, and what that means is not to exceed. The guidelines, the recommendation is for a 15-minute time box. So every morning, perhaps from 9 to 9:15 every workday, or whatever time you want to use, the team will get together and each individual will provide a sense of what they've worked on since the last meeting, what they're going to do in the new workday, and any impediments. These exact questions don't have to be the ones that are addressed in the meeting. This is the most common set of questions or points, and it is also the ones used by most successful organizations, so that's why I list them here. The potentially shippable product increment, the idea here is that at the end of every sprint, with the done working functionality, that done incremental functionality could be deployed. It's up to the business to decide what gets deployed and what doesn't get deployed. So what that translates to is new functionality may be accumulated via multiple sprints, but that's a business call. And so every sprint is about producing new working functionality, an incremental, an increment, if you will, and the business makes a decision. I'm going to revisit the shipping at the end of this talk, so you'll have a little bit more on that. That was sprint execution, including how to, how to forecast the number of sprints. And up next is the sprint review, and that is also known as the sprint demo or the show and tell. So this is step 8 out of 10. And here it's referred to as inspect and adapt or continuous improvement. This is where you're getting feedback on short cycles. So what will happen is the product owner, Scrum Master, and the developers, formerly known as development team, get together, and what they'll do is they will list the work that they had committed to, the work that was done. They will demo the done and the only done working functionality, because that's the stuff that is done and can be shipped if the business decides to do so. And the stakeholders can interact with the functionality and give feedback on it. This next step here is something that is not being done by everybody. It used to be extremely rare. It's much more common now than it was a few years ago, including at some of the successful implementations. So I listed here and mentioned it. The idea is that the team, the developers, the Scrum Master, the product owner, and the business stakeholders are already assembled. And in the remaining time of this meeting, since everything's fresh in their mind, they're going to revisit the product service backlog, and maybe something that was given this demo and some feedback, maybe something that was priority 4, for example, is now the new priority number 1. So there's some shuffling of the product service backlog. This step does not have to be done. It's being done more now than it used to be done. So that's why it's listed here for you to consider. So that was the sprint review, also known as the sprint demo or the sprint show and tell. And next is the retrospective, which is another example of inspect and adapt. So this is step 9 out of 10. And this is where the team gets together on a non-agile project. It might be referred to as a post-project review or a post-mortem or something like that, but it's called a sprint retrospective. And the exact approach and exact set of questions can be whatever you'd like, and maybe it should be even varied from meeting to meeting to keep things fresh and interesting and new. But the point is that you're trying to glean some sense of what went well, because you don't want it to be all negative. What went well, maybe some things that didn't go well or could be improved, and so that you have an improvement plan. The thing to consider that's unique about Agile Scrum compared with maybe a more traditional project approach like waterfall is the cycles are very short. Again, using the most frequent duration of 2 weeks, these are a lot of retrospective meetings. So the suggestion is for the team to identify one thing, and if they want to identify more, they can, but to make it doable and sustainable, maybe they pick out one thing, and maybe it's that one thing that's under their control. So if there's some feedback or some idea that's outside their control, maybe it still should be noted and followed up on by the Scrum Master or somebody else, but the improvement plan should be things that are under the control of the team that they can implement starting the next sprint. So that's the point of the retrospective. So there are, as I mentioned earlier, there are a variety of questions or ways to really arrive at that plan. Here are 2 questions that I have found to be quite helpful. They really elicit responses that are quite different than just asking, what went well and what didn't go well. And here they are. And you may want to consider them if you haven't already. How can we, the team, make an even bigger positive impact on the organization? Right? Very different from just asking what went well, what didn't go well. And then here's another one to think about. How can we, the team, achieve even greater ease of work? So the idea here is that oftentimes the answers are tiny little things that maybe normally wouldn't surface because they're not very big. By definition, they're tiny little things, but they're recurring, and maybe if they were addressed, it would be just one less thing to worry about going forward. So by asking different kinds of questions, you'll get different answers. So switching it up is not only common, but it's also recommended because if you're meeting every 2 weeks for retrospectives, it'll keep things fresh. So that is the sprint retrospective. And then up next is the product service release, the 10th step out of 10. And some of this has already been covered, so I want to fast forward it, but I'm just going to summarize by saying a sprint can be up to a month. The most common duration is 2 weeks. There are cases where sprints are 1 day, very rare, but it can be whatever you like. The recommendation is a month or less though. And sometimes things go out at the end of the sprint, sometimes they accumulate. So this next slide, I'm going to fast forward, really says it all. And I'm going to read it. Potentially shippable is defined by a state of confidence or readiness, and shipping is a business decision. So said differently, the work may go out at the end of the, by go out, I mean get deployed at the end of the sprint, or it might wait for multiple sprints before it goes out. So that was the product service release. And that's also rounds out the quick overview of Scrum in 10 sections. So I want to quickly wrap up by saying that the session gave an overview of Scrum, which is the most popular Agile framework. It's informed by top factors from successful implementations, and Scrum's value-driven approach incorporates adjustments based on regular and repeated feedback. And its built-in rapid response to change leads to benefits such as faster time to market and ROI, higher satisfaction and continuous improvement, which supports innovation and helps drive competitive advantage at the organizational level. I put together a digital download takeaway for you for attending this talk, and here's information on it. First is a bibliography, which are, earlier I showed you sources like the Project Management Institute and Scrum Alliance and MIT and Harvard Business Review. So those are in here and more. So there's 45 listed in the bibliography here. And I also have the main visual that was used in this presentation available as a 2-page high-resolution PDF that's available at bit.ly/take-ss2021, which is short for Scottish Summit 2021, of course. And I don't know about you, but I am tired of robots checking to see if I'm a robot, which is CAPTCHA. I'm tired of personal identifiable information in forms and things like that. So I deliberately, all you have to do is go to the URL and you can download this file. You don't need to fill out a form. Having said that, I would like to connect with you, and there is information on the company, the conference website in the digital download, as well as in the next slide or two on how you can connect with me on social. So I would like that, but that's on your terms. I want this to be as frictionless as possible. So all you have to do is put in this information into your web browser to get the PDF, and then you can save it to your computer if you'd like. Also, the conference organizers wanted me to share with you that this session and others will be published in approximately 14 days on YouTube. And with that, I want to move into thank you. First, thank you to you for attending the summit and this talk. I appreciate it. I want to thank Ian, Mark, and all the volunteer conference organizers, and also the sponsors. I'm going to list them quickly: ScriptRunner, DQ Global, Proximo 3, Redspire, Agilysys, and Hitachi Solutions, because it's thanks to you, the conference organizers, and the sponsors that this event was possible. Without all three, we wouldn't be here. So I wanted to thank you for that. This is the second to the last slide, and I'm going to hold here for just a moment or two, because it also includes the URL for the digital download at the end there, bit.ly/take-ss2021. And it also has my Twitter handle. While I leave the slide up, I also wanted to mention that in the remaining time, I will be addressing any feedback that you have and any questions through chat. If we run out of time and I don't get to your feedback or your question, please do, connect with me however you prefer, but the information is on the conference website in the digital download, and also using my Twitter handle here on this slide. So there's a variety of ways you can reach out to me And maybe you have a question a week from now, right? It doesn't have to be today, the day of the conference, that you have a question. So I look forward to hearing your feedback and answering any questions that you happen to have. And once again, I want to thank you for attending this talk. I appreciate it greatly. And I'm going to move on to the last slide. And from here, I'm going to let it, I'm going to hold here for just a few seconds, and then I'm going to move into chat. Thank you, everyone. See you on chat.